Raul still runs Cuba. The President Canel, he is nothing but a puppet. President Trump is practicing what we call the Brazilian jiu-jitsu politics, okay? He is slowly choking Cuba from all his resources. It doesn't work with these individuals because they see it as a sign of weakness. If that country implodes without a process, the exodus to the United States is going to be massive. Let me start with the background. I mean, socialism is a mask that that communism wears to lure you in. And if you name me one single democracy that went socialist/communist, not one has benefited from it. On the contrary, it's been completely the problem that we've had until Reagan. That whole Cuba thing was pretty much ignored. After the missile crisis, which came a year almost to the day after Bay of Pigs, Cuba was not really high on the political scale for the United States. Unfortunately, a lot of people give credit to Kennedy for, negotiating and ending the missile crisis. And the rebuttal is, if we would have been allowed to do the invasion correctly, like it was originally planned, we would have not had a missile crisis. But administration after administration, Cuba was there. We knew there was a pain. We knew that the Russians were there by force, but nobody focused on the fact that you have a dagger 90 miles from your belly, with huge military and intelligence presence for both Russia and subsequently China, which has incredible signals intercepts capability there. Reagan started the war on communism when he took over, and that's how I ended up in the Contra program. But because by then Cuba was, the Soviet Union via Cuba was fomenting problems in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Bolivia, you name it. They were peppering the whole, and that was the first attempt by a president to start fighting back. But he did not target Cuba directly. He mostly focused on El Salvador and Nicaragua, trying to get those tentacles out of reach. Subsequent administrations have tried to accommodate, make friends with, and that is so naive. Castro's regime has one enemy, one single enemy, and that's the United States of America. For 67 years, they have trying to undermine our any efforts, attacking us overseas. Everything from Havana syndrome incidents that they were literally attacking with some kind of microwave or something, our officers in the embassies. They have been a thorn in our side, both politically and militarily and intelligence, since then. So making peace with them is not an option. Look at our negotiations with the Russians. It's not an option. The only thing that the predators that the United States faces is that the predators that we have only understand somebody who bites harder. And all this detente and let's negotiate and let's try to have, it doesn't work with these individuals because they see it as a sign of weakness. China sees it as a sign of weakness. Russia, radical Islam sees it, and so does, of course, Cuba, being a proxy of the Soviet Union. It's huge in many facets. Okay, first of all, let's start with the fact that it is a failed state. So the potential for humanitarian crisis alone that you would literally have if that country implodes without a process, if it all of a sudden collapses and goes into chaos, the exodus to the United States is going to be massive. Not only that, because of the lack of electricity, lack of water, lack of medical, Cuba is actually under a very severe degree of dangerous epidemics, dengue and all this kind of stuff. So that's almost an attack in itself. On the military side, you have to understand that all Russian all weapons in Cuba are provided by the Russians. They have a Russian presence there, and they've had until, they still do, but it was a larger before. And again, China has a huge a base there that focuses signal intelligence against the United States. They try to suck up every communication from 90 miles away. I think it's being handled extremely smart. First of all, President Trump is practicing what we call Brazilian jiu-jitsu politics. Okay, he is slowly choking Cuba from all his resources and forcing them to recapitulate. Boots on the ground. I've been boots on the ground, and I don't condone that in just about any case. I think that there's so many other mediums that we can use to implement, our agenda. Um, I do believe that everything that's being done right now is been very, very successful. Um, the original embargo, everybody said, well, Cuba's in trouble because of the embargo. No, Cuba is in trouble because it was a mismanaged country, just like Venezuela. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela has some of the best oil in this hemisphere, and until recently, the money was worth less than toilet paper. How do you explain that? So that's the scenario with Cuba. So, but by now choking, okay, their oil supply from Venezuela, that was key. A lot of people say, why didn't he go to Cuba first? He didn't want to. Trump went into Venezuela to A, curb the narco trafficking that was affecting us, B, to neutralize that regime that which anti us, which was a platform for the Iranians and for the Chinese and for the Russians. Okay, but we were able to fix that particular angle with intelligence, with special missions. Um, we did put boots on the ground there, and some of my colleagues were on that front. Uh, but that was a one single incursion of hands-on just to get Maduro. And it also illustrates how well we were able to penetrate, CIA was able to penetrate the Venezuelan government so we could actually geolocate to the second where Maduro was going to be. Um, there's no way we cannot do that or easier in Cuba. Cuba is a military, social, and the disaster. When they actually advertise that they're getting ready to counter the U.S. invasion, the funniest one I saw was a ox-driven cart that had a dushka, machine gun in the back, and of course, when they fired it, the bulls go bananas, and this is what they're going to fight the Americans. So I don't think the boots on the ground is the route. I think that there's a lot of tools that are being used to pressure and to make a change. The sanctions or the legal attention now to Raul Castro, who he is now actually being charged with murder, and there's so much proof of that shot down. We actually have audio of Raul Castro giving the order to shoot these planes down. So that action in itself really does a lot of puts a lot of pressure on the regime, because now they do have the Maduro example in mind, and I know that that's something that's troubled them. But we used a tactic when the Soviet Union was starting to implode, is that we started reaching out to all Soviet officials overseas and telling us that you come to work for us now, and you'll end up with a house in Virginia, a Mercedes, a Rolex, and a bank account. Or you wait until the wall drops, and we'll give you a quarter so you can give somebody a call that gives a crap, right? And that's being used in Cuba also. The military there, you have to understand that the whole country is in shambles except the nomenclature that runs the country. There's a joke in Cuba. If you see a house that's painted, it belongs to a senior party member. Okay, so those people are fat with money. Even Fidel Castro, when he passed away, his worth was like $800 million. That's his personal wealth. Castro, Raul is the same. All these generals and all the leaders are the same. But what about that middle military and political part of the government? They understand that they need to find a way to make a transition that doesn't mean their destruction. And I believe that that's where we will be drawing a lot of our intelligence. That's where we will be doing a lot of the support. Um, so in closing, what I would say is keep the sanctions, keep choking them out, keep the political pressure. Um, I would go as far that is we were going to do some kind of quasi-military slap, it would be hitting some of their key facilities. You know, some of their where they keep their fighter planes, some of the anti-aircraft stuff, kind of like what we did in Iran the first few days. It just got went on and on and on. But Cuba doesn't have that kind of targeting, so that would be the first thing. The second thing that I think that it would be really viable is to try to arm the opposition. For the first time in 67 years, the Cuban people are on the streets burning police cars, throwing Molotovs at police stations, and banging their pots and pans in revolt. This has never happened really in Cuba, and is now endemic. So if we were to do airdrops with weapons and ammunition to the masses, which again is what we should be doing in Iran also, if we do further military action, I don't think that regime could last more than a couple of weeks. There may be a little bit of that, but you can't compare the military might or even the intelligence might of Iran compared to Cuba. Cuba is not, it's not a world power. It is a world terrorist and an insurrection machine for Russia, has been for 67 years. So yeah, no, the regime in Cuba, you'll have your diehards, but I honestly believe that their biggest Achilles is the fact that people are so discontent and they see the writing on the wall. And let's face it, when the ship catches on fire, rats start leaving, and that's what's going to happen. I think that that's going to be the vacuum that it's going to be we'll be able to fill. Excellent question, because he is the puppet master. Raul still runs Cuba. The president Canel, he is nothing but a puppet that does exactly what Raul tells him to do. What we tend to forget as a society is that there's certain sins that cannot be forgiven. The Castro regime, including Raul Castro, has the blood of tens of thousands of Cubans that have spent years and lifetimes and died in prison under conditions that are atrocious. There's a museum in Coral Gables in Miami that is called the Cuban Diaspora Museum, and they've recreated some of the cells where they keep these political prisoners. The photos of these prisoners coming out, it looked like something out of Auschwitz. Literally, that epoch kind of abuse. So Castro has for 67 years tortured, killed its own people. Now add to that the sins of the Castro regime, of where Raul has always been number two until Fidel died, and he is still number one now. Okay, Raul Castro is the leader of Cuba. But look at the wars and the lives that they have disrupted worldwide. In the early 70s in Africa, then Central America, and so on and so on and so on. So it's like the mafia boss that has all these crimes under him, and he's killed a bunch of people. But now, because he's 85 years old, he's asking for clemency. No, that doesn't work that way. Legally, we have a case against him. Like I said, we actually have audio of him authorizing the shutdown of those two civilian planes, which, by the way, they're called Brothers to the Rescue. They were armed, and their sole mission was to fly international waters, not Cuban waters. They were shot down in international waters, looking for the poor Cubans that were trying to leave in barrels, in broken bones, rafts, and then they would come in. They would drop, supplies. They would drop an inflatable boat, and then vector in to be able to help them out. All that is there, but the blood that's in the hands of the Castro regime, both in the island and international, is something that needs to be brought to justice. Absolutely. Look, you figure Iran, you touched on that a little with the IRGC. They are the most radical of radicals. Okay. They're the equivalent of the Japanese at the end of World War II. That, even after the first nuclear bomb was dropped on them, they didn't capitulate. They took the second one. And 10 years later, you were still finding soldiers in from the Philippines and in Laos and stuff with fighting for the Japanese. Cuba doesn't have that depth of force. It doesn't have the military might that Iran has. It doesn't have the die-hard mentality of the vast, very robust. IRGC has run that country for years. This is nothing new. The political figures have always been under the thumb of the IRGC. They're thugs. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I don't see that in Cuba now. A Venezuela-like, a mix of a Venezuela and an Iran posture would be ideal, I think. I would say gather intelligence, find out where the key leaders are, including Raul, and target them, either like we did with Maduro, which, by the way, to show how elite the Cuban forces are, Maduro's bodyguards, all 38 of them, were Cuban elite forces. Every single one of them was killed, and none of our Delta boys were even had a scratch on them. So that fallacy of Cuban, mystique is the same mystique that has been cracked with the Russians. The Russians thought they were going to take over Ukraine in 2 weeks, like we did Iraq when we got rid of Saddam Hussein. Here we are 4 years later, and they're in the trouble that they are. So I believe that between the political pressures, the economic pressures, the social pressures, some selected targeting, and perhaps a capture mission. To tell you the truth, at 94, I'd rather that we blow him up because he's not going to survive a trial anyway. So that would save us, boots on the ground to actually grab him. I think that combination and the fact that the discontent is such that it will provide the agency and the intelligence services the capability to better geolocate sensitive targets, people. And the icing of the cake would be arming the civilian population. What can China or what can Russia do? Russia is in a quagmire. Well, I mean, unless they want to go to, I mean, first of all, if we go into a nuclear situation, nobody's going to go on a nuclear situation over Cuba. I'm sorry. Cuba is no longer that key to anybody. Russia is in a quagmire where they've lost hundreds of thousands of people. Their economy is in shambles. The projection of their power is very limited. They can threaten their neighbors because of proximity, but they're not going to go into a toe-to-toe fight with the United States over Cuba. Okay, that's number one, nor do they have the capability. And if they did, there is no conventional military in the world that can dance with the U.S. We got 21 years or more of vetted, bloodied veterans. That's where our military force is, and I think that the special operations they did in Venezuela really highlight that the capabilities that we have and what we were able to do to Iran. So Russia is not going to be a stopping block. They're not going to support us. They are going to provide intelligence to the Cubans, just like they're providing intelligence to the Iranians. The Chinese, their foothold in this hemisphere was Venezuela. That was their main. Don't get me wrong; they have influences throughout the country. But you figure a few years back, probably about 6 years back, the Panama Canal, the security by the Panama Canal was by Chinese. Here is the main way from Pacific to Atlantic, and it is controlled by the Chinese security. They could shut it down at any time. That's gone. And now with Venezuela making the changes that is made and the turnarounds that is made, China has lost not only one of their main oil suppliers, but also that foothold that they had in our hemisphere, a hemisphere that was attacked from Venezuela by Iran. A lot of the terrorist activities and a lot of the cells that we have in the United States came via Venezuela. They were trained, documented, and sent in through the, to go into the U.S. border. So I don't see a major threat other than verbal opposition from either China or Russia. They didn't do it for Venezuela, and Venezuela was actually, I think, at least economically, a much more important entity for both China and Russia than Cuba ever was. Cuba doesn't produce anything. Well, I'm hoping for a diplomatic solution. Okay, obviously with a military threat, and by the way, things like the Maduro extraction, it comes with a lot of agency participation. The agency has the Special Activities Division. Our motto is the third option. The first option is diplomatic. The second option is military. When neither one of those is viable for whatever reasons, the third option is covert action by us. So that's always the way that it works. If we can pressure all three of those, okay, through diplomatic pressure, through economical pressure, through military threat or action, and intelligence threat or action, that can topple the regime. Then the rebuilding would not be the United States rebuilding Cuba. It would be, a bona fide private sector that would come in and fill that vacuum, which is huge. There are already coalitions in South Florida or in Florida and in the United States writ large, because there's a huge Cuban population here, Cuban American population, that are extremely wealthy, that own huge companies, and every single one of them has stood up and said, if the U.S. government can guarantee that if we go build businesses in Cuba, they will not be confiscated like they were confiscated in 1960, 1961, 1962, the Cubans will be celebrating in Florida, and there'll be billions of dollars pouring in